What makes the Leica M9 so special? It's the sensor. The Leica M9 is one of only two Leica M models with the coveted CCD sensor. It's for this reason that many still consider it to be one of the greatest digital Leica Ms ever. But this sensor is not perfect, and it can be a ticking time bomb that will cost thousands to fix if you buy the wrong camera. So is it worth the hassle? Last year, I reviewed the older brother of this camera, the M8, and I thought it was one of the most stripped back, enjoyable photography experiences that I had ever tried. I want to thank my friend John for loaning me this camera to play with for a few weeks and test out. He's actually graciously lent me every single digital Leica M that I've ever tried on this channel, from the M8 to the MD262 and now this M9, and this video would not have been possible without his support. Also, before we begin, be sure to subscribe to see more great photography content. To find out just how good this camera is, I decided to go for a photography road trip down the coast to the Cape Schank lighthouse here in Victoria and take some nice photos on a bloody hot summer's day. And a fellow YouTuber friend of mine, Gerard, came down from Queensland and he joined me on the trip as well. And despite being 40 degrees and having a few unwelcome visitors, there are so many fucking flies. Oh, Jesus Christ. It was still a great time and we got some awesome photos. But first we actually stopped at a really picturesque place called The Pillars, which is a really popular cliff diving location here in Victoria. And I really love the way that these turned out, especially on the M9. So how is the Leica M9? Is it really that special of a camera, or is it all just hype? If you have never shot with a proper rangefinder before, I honestly think it's something that you really have to try in person before you understand why there are so many people that go crazy over these cameras. Now, many people look at the price of these cameras, they see how expensive they are, and then they immediately say that they would never pay that much money for a camera without autofocus and such limited features. And Gerard was actually just like that as well. However, after shooting with this M9, he actually found it really enjoyable and said that he sort of gets it. And I think he's now actually considering getting his own M body, which is pretty exciting. I think the camera itself is very special, and I don't think there's any denying that. All M bodies are very special. But I think the M9 specifically is actually probably one of the best digital Ms that you can get. And I believe a lot of that has to do with the sensor. I have talked about CCD sensors for a while on this channel now, from the Ricoh GRD series to obviously the M8 and now the M9, and I am a huge fan of them. CCD sensors tend to have better color rendition, nicer skin tones, and overall a more organic look to photos. They do also have some notable downsides, such as pretty poor high ISO performance and pretty weak dynamic range. However, that is where the M9 is quite special because unlike other, smaller and lower resolution CCD sensors like the ones in the GRD or the M8, on the M9, the low light performance is actually decent. I mean, it's not obviously modern camera standards, but it is definitely quite a bit better than the M8. You get I would say a maximum usable ISO of about 1250, whereas the M8 I found struggled at anything above 640 ISO. So just like I said in the M8 review, if you treat this camera like a film camera, you won't have any problems and it works very well. And also, if you guys are liking the way that the photos are looking, they're all edited with my Lightroom presets, and every purchase helps to support me and this channel. Now, another advantage of the M8 and their M9 is actually their battery life. So, despite this camera being so old and being on its original battery, given that you don't use the screen much and there is no EVF, the battery life is actually really impressive. So, I shot about 300 photos on this road trip and the battery only drained by about 25%. The build quality is, as you would expect, absolutely stellar. It is a fully brass body, which is heavy, but oh so solid, with every button and dial just feeling extremely precise and well made. And if you've never had the chance to hold an M body, I would really highly recommend it if you want to feel what the literal definition of build quality is. This thing is built like an absolute tank. The screen on the back of this camera, like the M8, is pretty much useless. But at least unlike the M8, you can actually zoom in to get a better look at whether or not you hit focus. Although one thing you do need to remember, which is something I didn't realize when I first started testing this camera, is you do need to be a little bit patient, as it does take a few seconds for it to load the preview.
And how do I check that's in focus?
You can, no touchscreen. Zoom in with the wheel. There you go.
Screen, yeah.
Just wait for it, hang on. Wait for it. It's gonna load. Okay, maybe that's it. I talked earlier about how this camera can be a ticking time bomb, and there are a few issues with this camera, specifically the sensor. So just to give you a little history lesson, so the M8 was very, very sensitive to infrared light. So you needed an IR cut filter to avoid like strange colors in photos, like blacks would turn purple and stuff like that. And during my review, I didn't have an IR cut filter, so I sort of just accepted it for what it was. I still think the colors are great, but having used the M8 now with an IR cut filter, I can tell you, looking back, I would absolutely always only use that camera with an IR cut filter. But anyway, they fixed this with the M9. They fixed the sensor, they made it so that it didn't require that filter anymore. But they also introduced another problem, a little bit more of a serious problem. Sensor corrosion. The early M9 sensors had a corrosion issue. And if you look on eBay, you will actually notice fluctuating prices for M9s. So some may seem like a really good deal at around 3,000 Australian dollars, but they will most likely have that old sensor that has either started to corrode, is already corroded, or will corrode very soon. All the old sensors will eventually corrode. There is no like getting out of it. So I would say that if you're buying an M9, make sure that the CCD has been updated to at least a CCD ID 15 or 16. Those are the most recent sensors. Those sensors have updated glass, so they will not corrode. But they did stop offering this service in, I think it was 2020 or 2021. But there is a company called Kalari Vision in America that can actually, I don't know if they replace the full sensor or they just replace the sensor glass, but they're probably the only place that I'm aware of that can fix the CCD sensor in a corroded M9, but it is a pretty expensive procedure and it will definitely take a while. So I wouldn't gamble on it. And I think for practical purposes, I would strongly just recommend buying an M9 with a replaced sensor to avoid any corrosion issues in the future. Now, of course, there are still potential problems. I mean, your shutter could break and various issues could arise due to the camera's age. However, I personally believe that as long as you keep using the M9 and you don't let it like sit unused, it should hopefully continue to serve you well for many years into the future. Now, regarding the M8 versus the M9, I have actually got another video planned for a direct comparison between the two, as I believe it's a topic that's deserving enough of its own video, and it was also a little bit challenging to do a comprehensive comparison during this road trip. What I will say is that from general use, I do prefer the shutter sound of the M8. It has a more of a mechanical feel. Whereas the M9, it's a lot more subtle. It's a lot less cha-chink with like a sound of that like shutter curtain being pulled across. I don't know, I really like the mechanical sound of the M8. That's a little bit controversial. I know some people don't like the sound of the M8. They prefer the M9, but yeah, let me know which one you like more. The 10 megapixel resolution of the M8 definitely gives it a little bit more of a filmic vibe, but the downside is that you obviously do need an IR cut filter and also the 1.33 times crop, which is definitely nowhere near as bad as APS-C, but it's not ideal, and it's definitely not full frame. And I feel like with a Leica, with an M body, you want to be using like a 35mm lens and you want to know it's a 35mm lens. You don't want to like have to get a 28 to account for that basically. So I love using this 35-1.4 Voigtlander on this camera. Just a tiny, awesome little lens. a little bit useless at 1.4, but from f2 and above, this is just a cracker little lens. So nice and just like really fits perfectly on any M body, really. But I will say that overall, the M9 feels like a much snappier camera, given that it is 3 years newer. So going through all the menus and setting ISO and changing everything around, everything feels much quicker and a little bit more like snappy. Ultimately speaking, I think that this camera really just feels like the ultimate CCD Leica and maybe the ultimate CCD camera. And I definitely think this is one of the best digital M bodies ever made. I think honestly, the 18 megapixel sensor that's in this M9 is very usable, and you can totally crop in quite a bit. There was this one shot from the beach of this girl jumping into the water. And it would have been great if it had even a little bit more resolution, because I would have liked to crop in a little bit more, but it's still better than like the M10's 10 megapixels, I guess, which is good. So it definitely makes it quite a bit more suitable for modern applications. And honestly, if you're posting on social media, I think it's more than enough. One downside as well that it needs to be mentioned, like the M8, is that the M9 does not actually support memory cards over 32 gigabytes. Or at least I couldn't get it to read any memory card over 32 gigabytes. So you need to either find old SD cards or buy low capacity ones. And with the raw files being around about 35 megabytes each, so quite a bit bigger than the M8, a 32 gig card can hold maybe around about 1,000 photos, which is totally manageable. I mean, a roll of film with 36 shots, so I don't think many people are going to be rapid firing this camera and taking thousands of shots a day anyway, but you know, this is really the kind of camera that just works best for someone looking to really slow down with their photography and enjoy the process itself. And even the whole process of taking out the SD card and the battery, just like on the M8, you've got the really beautiful brass bottom plate that you take off, very reminiscent of like a film Leica, and there's even a little indentation here that looks like it's for a roll of film. So it's very, very cool. It's the kind of camera that it's just like a joy to use. It's so pleasant to shoot with this, and this is like, if you're going on a holiday, I can't think of a better camera to use on a holiday than like a proper Leica M with a really nice lens on the end of it. I absolutely love this thing. It's fantastic. This and the M8. I mean, the M8 is awesome, and the M9 is awesome. I think all these early Leica M's are just fantastic cameras. So who is this camera for? I think the Leica M9 is a camera for someone who wants the absolute peak of CCD technology. High resolution with decent enough high ISO performance that is still totally usable in 2024 and beyond, yet still with the stunning colors that the Kodak developed sensor can deliver. And the M9 is also a camera that actually has appreciated in recent years. So I remember using this camera back in 2016 and really wanting to buy one, but being quite broke back then. But I remember they were selling for maybe $3,000 to $3,500 Australian dollars with like replaced sensors and stuff in them. But now I think that price has actually gone up to like $5,500 or $6,000, and they can go even higher than that if it's in really good condition with the box and everything like that. I think the price on these will honestly continue to rise, and as long as you have a replaced sensor camera, I think you'll always be able to sell it for at least what you paid for it. Now, is it worth twice what an M8 is worth? Like I said earlier, I'll have a video coming out soon, which will be more a direct comparison between these two cameras, but I can say this, that in hand, they are very similar cameras, and it's all so dependent on what you can afford. But if I could only have one digital Leica M, it would honestly probably be the M9. Well, that's all for today. Have you guys ever used an M9? What do you think? Let me know in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you guys next week, and have a great day.
Oh, look at those balls. Look at the size of those. Fucking nuggets.